Hey guys, this is Kevin and I'm a UX designer in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Today we'll be talking about user experience design, what it is, what it isn't, and the steps I take to complete my user experience design projects. We're going to go through research methods, different examples of wireframes, how to concept new ideas, and what to do when you're finished with your project. Thanks for watching. So let's start off with what UX design isn't. A lot of people ask me, well, what do you do for a living? Oh, design, graphic design, making things look pretty. Is it just Photoshop? You mess around with colors and typography and fonts and stuff like that? No, so UX design isn't about graphic design. And right here, it's not just about usability or wireframes. UX design is more about the process of understanding your users to create a better experience for whatever goal you're trying to accomplish. And this takes part in identifying key pain points, understanding your audience, their goals, their wants and needs, doing a bunch of primary and secondary research, which includes interviewing, stepping into the environment that your key stakeholders live in, seeing what it's like to be in their shoes, doing just random Google searches, or just researching more about the area that you are focusing on. So, for example, if you're doing some sort of app for people who want to rent cars, you might want to go to the dealership and just observe how people look at different cars or models, or even do research on your friends and ask them questions about what they look for when they're renting a car or buying a new car and stuff like that. It's all about putting your mindset and putting your physical and mental body into the environment that your users live in. So right here on the screen, we see two examples of what UX design is. Now I pulled two sort of different images just to give you a sense of what you would tangibly be doing in the user experience design process. So on the left, we have sort of a steep analysis map where you look at social, technological, environmental, economical, and political aspects of what you're working around and trying to see if you can draw any connections from them. So in this case, I did a bunch of post-it notes on Albuquerque and air quality and thinking about what that environment looks like, what my goal is, and what are the main key insights I can gain from that subject matter. And on the right side, we have examples of user journey maps. So this is for the same thing, sort of like air quality in Albuquerque. I looked at two different key stakeholders and mapped out where the pain points lie, where they just are going around their journey. Basically, the user journey map and UX flow and all that stuff is just examples of what you would be doing in UX design. Now here we have an image. This might be the result of UX design, but this isn't what you should be thinking UX design is. These are final high fidelity screens of an app that I've created. And although it looks like, oh, UX design is apps or products or final deliverables or wireframes, it's really not. This would be more some sort of UI design where you're focusing on color, typography, layout, sort of what the app looks like, what it feels like, how it's executed at the end. But I want to emphasize that UX design is more about the research, the process of understanding your users, more of what the steep analysis and the user journey map showed. So now moving on to the second step, which is understand. So this is the problem space. Who is my audience? What are their wants and needs and goals? What are you really trying to solve? Then what are the boundaries and restraints? If you're creating an app where your audience is maybe older or has poorer vision, you might want to be sort of designing with bigger fonts or designing with very obvious colors and very obvious text in mind. And this is how you can understand your audience better. This is how you can do UX design the right way, which is actually designing solutions not based on gut feeling or based on random sort of subjective insights, but rather who your audience really is and where their pain points lie. In this case, if you have an older audience or a disabled audience, your pain point lies in the fact that they just can't see the text, or they just really need some visual cue to help them read the app. And in this case, you would be using bigger text, obvious fonts, and prioritizing those type of things over cool UI or something that's just in trend right now. Here's another part of understanding your problem space, and this is competitive analysis. Competitive analysis is basically looking at similar products, apps, experiences, services, the thing that you're trying to create, and just observe what is already out there in the world and seeing where the pros and cons are. In this case, if I'm making an air quality app that utilizes maps like Google Maps or Waze, I want to look at Google Maps and Waze, and I just want to see where they succeed in and where they fail in. Is it easy to understand? Is the usability good? What about the flow of the user through these apps? I want to take inspiration from my competitive analysis to make my app the best it can be. So, step three, research. In this case, we're going to be talking about interviews. So, when you're interacting with your audience, you need to ask the right questions, looking at the pain points, taking away insights. Tangibly, you want to be creating personas and user journey maps, UX flows, all that type of stuff as deliverables for this process. So here we have the user journey map again, as well as a small example of personas. So in this case, what I've done is drawn an image from Google that sort of represents the persona that I'm trying to portray. And you don't always need to have a picture. It can be like a user's icon or something like that. But the main idea here is you're creating a story around what you believe is the primary user. And in this case, I'm looking at middle-aged female Maria, middle-aged man Mark, and seeing how these two different users are both what I'm focusing on, even if they vary. And once you look at sort of who you're trying to target and creating a journey map for them, you have a better understanding of who your users are, what they go through in life, and what are the obvious pain points that you can solve with the app, product, service that you're trying to create. In this example, we see Maria goes to work, but she has pollution around her house. She walks to work instead of drives, and just has a lot of exposure to bad air. So with that example of making a air quality app, I've got an audience, Maria, who is always exposed to this, versus Mark, who is a businessman with a car, and doesn't get exposed to the bad air quality as much. So it's these things to keep in mind when you're creating personas or user journey maps or UX flows. Again, this is another user journey map in a different format. This is for Marcus, a recent college grad in 2025. In this case, I was creating an app for a persona, Marcus, who works at a coffee shop, has like some 9 to 5, but his passion lies somewhere else. In this case, I looked at the story that was created, and I created an emotions over time sort of journey to sort of see where the pain points lie in where the pain points lie emotionally, when he's happiest, when he's most sad, because we're trying to look at his quality of life and how this app can sort of help him utilize the resources of his passion and sort of help him move from like a coffee shop job that he doesn't enjoy as much to something he's more passionate about. So in this case, we look at touch points, users' thoughts. Now, in this case, this was all like assumption, sort of trying to see what the user might have thought without doing actual interviewing. But an example of this user journey map is good for you guys to understand how there are different ways you can approach researching, synthesizing, and taking the answers you get from interviews or research and forming it into a map that helps you visualize what the user's journey is like. Here's an example of UX flow, or something called a sitemap. This is where you look at the basics of the app and the components within it, or a service or a product, and seeing how you go from the first stage to the last stage, or seeing all the components within the product listed out in sort of like a flow chart. In this case, you see like 1, 2, 2B, 3, 4, sort of the different options that the user can go to, like left or right. And if you go left, you have another choice, left or right, kind of like a family tree. And in this case, this helps you map out what the path is like for a user moving forward. And you can prototype this with different users or friends, and then see if it makes sense. Because in this stage, you kind of want to see how your app is going to flow, how the service is going to work, how the product functions. And if someone gets confused from step 1 to step 2, like, oh, how did I get here? Then you have good feedback that you can take into the app and sort of redesign it so that your flow of UX makes sense. So concepting. How do we design with purpose? How do you do something so that you utilize all the interview material that you've done, all the insights you've gotten? You've looked at the pain points, you've done user journey maps, you've done UX flows, Now what? So now is the concept phase, is where you tackle the pain points. You make a bunch of iterations and you sort of see which one fits best for a user based on logic and based on what pain points you're actually tackling. So I'm all, I'm all, I've always been told don't get too invested in one idea, and this is something you should keep in mind because let's say you come up with a brilliant idea first and you think it's the winner. Well, if you get too invested in it, you sort of narrow your mindset and you don't really see other options that could be more viable or maybe better in the long run. So when you're in the concept phase of thinking of different ideas to execute your design with, you should always start pretty low fidelity and high concept view, which means get some sketches out, get some ideas written on the whiteboard, and have multiple things that are really roughed out so that you don't get too invested in a single idea. So here's some sketches that I did when I was creating the air quality app, which is just looking at what components do I really need in this app, what does the layout kind of look like, and different types of components I wanted. If I wanted a rating system, some sort of AQI index, air quality index, that allows you to look at the score the whole time, or if there's some warnings or history. There's just a bunch of ideas on this page that I could work with, and I'm not too invested in it because nothing looks super professional or high quality. It's all very sketched out, really rough, so you sort of get the concept there, but you don't need to really technically execute yet. And then you move on to the design phase, which is grayscale wireframes, clickable prototypes, and doing different mock-ups so that you can test it with users, like paper prototyping or stuff like that. Here are just some examples of what your final product could look like without any UI design, and it's just sort of grayscale wireframes that clearly tell you you're moving from one page to the next, or you see the exact layout of a certain page, but you're not so deeply invested in it that it's like the final wireframe. So now once you've finished your designs and you feel confident in what you've produced at the end, there's this implementation and evaluation stage. Now we look at this four circle diagram that's very common around UX design. Discover, explore, test, listen. We've discovered through research and understanding our user base. We've explored different ideas through the concept phase. Now it's time to test the design that we've created and listen for feedback. And this is sort of like the feedback loop that you hear all in UX, because this is how you perfect your product or service, is that you test what you've created, listen for the feedback, apply that feedback, test again, and keep doing it till you feel comfortable with what you've created and you think that it tackles a lot of the pain points that your user has. And usually through this cycle of discover, explore, test, and listen, you end up having a product that evolves over time and can sort of hold its ground through different users. And we see this time and time again in the App Store. I mean, every time you get an update in the App Store for Snapchat or Instagram or Facebook or whatever, it's the company testing different layouts, testing different algorithms, listening to feedback, going through meetings of saying what's best next. I mean, you've seen it in Instagram's algorithm when they change their algorithm from most recent discovered to some new algorithm that makes the app show you different things based on your interest or likes or something like that. And it's not only based on time based posts. And maybe that's something they tested and they might listen for feedback and change it again. You never know. So it's a good thing to have sort of a final product be open to change so that you're always adapting with time and allowing the user to get sort of more feedback into your app. It just always makes it better, and it makes it more transparent. And lastly, I want to leave you guys with sort of a good habit to keep in mind when doing UX design or even UI design or just design in general, and that's documenting your process. Whether your app fails or succeeds, whether you learned a lot or you feel like you didn't learn a lot, you will always have something at the end if you document your process. This means making a Medium blog post from the start to the finish of your inner thoughts or different ideas that didn't work and ideas that did work, taking pictures of whiteboarding sessions or post-it sessions and quoting different feedback notes that you got from your users, screenshotting Google surveys that you gave to 100 people, and just putting it all in a folder, putting it all into a blog or something that sort of logs the progress over time. Because I can't tell you guys how much I've failed in the past because of poor wireframing or poor concepts or something just didn't go through or the project got cut off early. But you still gain value from doing that when you document your process. You learn from the way that you work. You learn that maybe UX flows weren't as good this time, but your user journey map was amazing. Or maybe all the research you've done was so good and that led up to you realizing that this concept might not be worth tackling. And going through that journey and documenting that is so much value for yourself and your users because you're discovering a lot about whatever you're trying to accomplish. You're discovering a lot about yourself, your process, how you design, how your design works or not works. And at the end, that can be a design challenge at the end. That can be a design um, project that you get out of whatever you're working on. Um, and if anyone's looking for like top tech jobs or top UX design jobs, I can guarantee you there's one thing in common between all of them, and that's valuing the process, valuing how you think through things and how you make decisions based on rationale and research. And seeing that process might be more valuable than the end result sometimes. So, just want to leave you guys with that last tidbit of documenting your process. I think it helps me, it helps a lot of my peers, and I think it'll help you guys too for those that are learning UX design for the first time. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or shoot me a DM or anything. I respond to every comment that I get, and I'm more than happy to help or just talk about UX design or design in general. Thanks for watching.